So, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. This was posted by Honorable Zinhu, Killer Zinhu. For those of you who are not familiar with the guy, he was a Zanu PF MP. Fellow Zimbabweans, I apologize for my previous stance on 2030. I was blinded by loyalty, but I realize now that advocating for a third term goes against our constitution. 2 terms are enough for a president. Let's empower other capable Zimbabweans to lead. Ndiregerereiwo. I find this truly sickening. We have had 44 years of Zanu PF corruption, mismanagement, tyrannical, and ruthless rule. And the regime is kept in power for all these 44 years because it has rigged the elections. And here we are 44 years down the line. Here is somebody coming up with what undoubtedly he thinks is his soul to the road, on the road to Damascus moment, the moment of enlightenment. And this enlightenment, the sum total of it, is that he had made a mistake to support Mnangagwa's bid to stay in power beyond 2028. I think what I find sickening is that we have got serious problems, and all he can think about is that Mnangagwa should not stay in power beyond 2028. We have got a problem in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a failed state. We need to address that fundamental problem. And I'm getting sickened by the Zanu PF loyalists who are fighting their own internal war and are trying to stampede the rest of the population into joining their side for their own selfish reasons. Let's be very clear here. This 2030 Mnangagwa anenge achipo bandwagon is an internal affair. It's a factional war within Zanu PF. As much as many of us will detest seeing the constitution being changed to allow Mnangagwa to run for a third term, what we've got to realize here is that if we were to take our attention, draw our attention away from the big issues, the 44 years of looting, rigged elections, and killing by Zanu PF, and start focusing on, or we must make sure that it doesn't stay in power for, extend this stay in power by a third term, we will have lost the real battle. The real battle here is to end the Zanu PF dictatorship, and not to be entangled in which of the two dictators should be in office. Because let me rest assure you, it really doesn't matter. If Mnangagwa's faction win the day and Mnangagwa is a Zanu PF candidate in 2028, or if Chiwenga and his supporters win the day and he is the Zanu PF candidate in 2028, regardless of which one of them is the candidate, we can be certain of one thing. Zanu PF will go on and rig those elections. And at the end of the day, we will still have a Zanu PF dictatorship, a Zanu PF dictator in power. That is what we are fighting here. We are fighting to end the dictatorship. And in getting rid of the dictatorship, we get rid of the dictator. And we should not be drawn into fighting, taking sides, and fighting the battle of which of the two should become the next dictator. That is what is important here. It is interesting that as much as Honorable Zinhu and his colleagues are trying to portray our friend VP Chiwenga as a Democrat, the truth of the matter is he is not a Democrat. I don't have to remind you that VP Chiwenga and Mnangagwa were in the Lacoste faction, run up to the 2017 military coup. Here is a picture of Chiwenga just a few weeks before the coup, holding the constitution. The coup was staged under the pretext that it was necessary to protect the constitution. But even he or any of his colleagues could quote the chapter and verse in the constitution that said a military coup was justified, legal, and constitutional. Because there is no such chapter and verse in the constitution that allows that. So here is an individual who will always want to be seen to be upholding the law when it suits him or his agenda. In this factional war that's going on in Zanu PF right now, he is doing the same thing again. He is trying to mobilize the rest of the population on the basis that the factional war is about upholding the constitution of the country, that no one should be allowed to stay in power beyond the constitutional two-term limit. If Chiwenga really cared about the constitution, then he should also know that the constitution calls for free, fair, and credible elections. The respect of all the citizens to exercise their freedom and fundamental rights, including the right to life. Ever since the 2017 military coup, he, if he was honest, will admit that Zanu PF has been rigging elections. Is that upholding the law? He is one of the individuals who are incredibly rich. And I think he knows that his wealth was not amassed from the salary of being the commander or the VP. A few months ago, there were pictures in the media of his new house called the White House, costing millions of dollars to build. When he was having a divorce with one of his wives, former wives, it was shown that he has got an impressive list of Porsche cars, farms, and business interests, 45 gold watches. He cannot, in all honesty, no one out there can say he bought all those things using legal ways from his earnings. We have got here an individual who is just trying to use the Constitution to rope in the naive and gullible among our citizens who think that by stopping Mnangagwa getting into power somehow will help in any way end the dictatorship. It won't. It will only be swapping one dictator for another. This happened in 2017, and we should not let it happen again. As for Mnangagwa himself, there can be no doubt that Mnangagwa is a dictator. When he was part of the coup in 2017, he promised to hold free, fair, and credible elections. We all know that he was quick to forget that promise. Here he is on one of his farms. This is the man who stubbornly refused to grant the people in the rural areas title deeds to even 1 acre. And yet he and his fellow ruling elite are now the owners of big farms. The farms ceased from the whites. They took them over. They didn't pay a penny, and they inherited them. And some of them are now selling the same farms to ordinary Zimbabweans and making a fortune. And yet, he stubbornly refuses to give title deeds to even 1 acre to alleviate the suffering, particularly in the rural areas. There is no doubt that Zimbabweans in the rural areas are the poorest of the poor. No one deserves to live the kind of life they are being forced to live here. And yet the regime is adamant. Here is Margaret Dongo, a former Zanu PF MP herself, speaking on the subject of why the rural poor, the rural people are being kept poor.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for Zanu PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. Zanu PF will never have control over them.
The fight is not over which of the two dictators emerge after 2028. The fight is to end the dictatorship. If we let ourselves be sidelined and be roped into fighting this ED2030 factional fight, we will find ourselves at best with Mnangagwa denied the opportunity to extend his rule by a third term. But that is little comfort, because I can rest assure you, whether it's Chiwenga who comes in or somebody else, as long as Zanu PF retains the carte blanche powers to rig the elections, they will rig the elections. And we will still be stuck with the same corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship. We need to focus, and our focus should be that there is democratic reforms implemented before the 2028 elections. At the present moment, I don't see any meaningful reforms being implemented because Zanu PF has got absolute control of Parliament and the Senate, and the opposition, Triple C, or whatever is left of it, they are too busy fighting among themselves for the scraps. They had the opportunity to force Zanu PF to implement reforms during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, and they failed. Our best chance now is to make sure that we do not keep on participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. That has been our problem since the GNU. Nelson Chamisa and his friends, have conned the people to participate in flawed elections. to give Zanu PF political legitimacy. We must wake up to that reality. We must stop participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy and perpetuate the dictatorship. That should be our focus. It's a pity that we have got a system that has not allowed the Zimbabwe electorate to learn from the past. The people have been stampeded from pillar to post by both Zanu PF and the MDC-CCC. There is no doubt that Chamisa was lying about having plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. What matters, however, is that people did believe him. Millions of Zimbabweans believed him. And some people have been complaining that why did SADC refuse to deny Zanu PF political legitimacy, even though SADC election observers themselves condemned last year's elections as flawed? The answer to that is simple. If Zimbabweans participated in the flawed elections in our millions, it is not for SADC to try to undermine that expression of the democratic will, particularly when we knew that by participating, we give Zanu PF legitimacy. We have been warned so many times. We need to wise up. I would like to end this discussion with a video clip of Dr. Nevers Mumba reminding Zimbabweans of what we have to do to make sure that 2028 elections are free, fair, and credible.
Said to me, Mr. Vice President, go on behalf of SADC, and all I expect from you is to help to give the Zimbabweans a free, fair, and credible election. Those are the only, he said it twice. I need nothing from you, Mr. Vice President, but free, fair, and credible election. You would have done your job. When I was in Zimbabwe, and we were on our way to go and see President Mnangagwa to pay a courtesy call on him, I contacted the president here, President Nhaka in the Chile. I said, Mr. President, we are going to see your colleague. Do you have a word for him? Any greeting, whatever? He said, no. The only thing you tell my colleague is that let's go ahead and give the Zimbabweans a free, fair, and credible election. He repeated the same words. So there was one.
I could not re-emphasize that point. What we have got to realize here is people like our friend here, Honorable Zinhu, and war veteran Blessing Gaza, among many others, are trying to stampede the ordinary Zimbabweans into believing that the big issue before the nation is stopping Mnangagwa corrupting the constitution so that he can serve a third term. Important as that is, the big issue for Zimbabwe is putting an end to the curse of rigged elections and bad governance after 44 years. And that you are not going to do merely by stopping Mnangagwa extending his rule. Because if you pay attention to that, you ignore the bigger issue of dismantling the dictatorship. You can't do both. If you concentrate on stopping Mnangagwa serving a third term and still retain the Zanu PF dictatorship, then you have accomplished nothing. The big issue is ending the Zanu PF dictatorship. Focus on what really matters. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to listen, and we hope you join us again tomorrow evening, same time, 6 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time.